So guys, you can tell we are talking about the ban list, and I just thought, why not? Because it's almost time for it, and everybody puts out a ban list video at some point, and I do believe with Worlds about to end by the time this comes out, I do think it's time that if the ban list hasn't come out, we're going to be having these. So if the ban list has already came out, and, my video is here, well, sucks, but, these are just my opinions, because I thought I would do this just because, why not? And honestly, because of the upcoming ban list we're going to be in, it's pretty interesting because there's a lot going on, but let's just get into the nitty gritty. Because with ban list videos, I'm usually excited, but also not excited because, it's never really up to us. So that's ultimately the reason why when I do these types of videos, I'm like, but also I can be a bit more free because they're funny. But before that, let me get the shameless plug out of the way. Remember, guys, to go ahead, like, and subscribe. Remember to also hit the notification bell, and remember to join up as we are on the Storm 2000 subs. We can only get there with your help, and remember, the ad army is the only army that you can add yourself to. Now, we're going to get started by talking about the banned cards, and actually, the funny thing I have here for banned is that there are only going to be so many cards I have banned. I think I have 5 to possibly 6. No, it's 5 cards in total that I think should probably be banned for sure. Now, the interesting thing is that the format has changed a lot thanks to Justice Hunters entering the format, so a lot of things changed around it. So obviously the Justice Hunters decks are the top or the cream of the crop right now. So all the other decks that are kind of there are just kind of either rogue or they're still there, but they're probably going to get addressed anyways. So I did want to bring it up because I do think this is an important situation, because I do think these decks need to be checked just so that, one, they're not going to have a chance for return, but also for some of these cards that are going to be banned and or hurt, is so that other decks that will use these cards or have used these cards will possibly get more future support, because that's just my opinion. I think some of these decks are definitely going to get future support down the line, and it's best that they lose the cards now or these cards get nixed now so they don't become longer lasting problems. So yeah, like I said, 5 of them. We're going to start off with the one I think is the most obvious. We have King of the Feral Imps. Now, King of the Feral Imps being banned I think is a no-brainer at this point, due to the fact that I think Konami doesn't really want Mitsurugi Ryziel being a thing anymore. So the only way to really address that properly is to get rid of King of the Feral Imps, because it is the bridge. I think this one's an obvious one because a lot of people have talked about this, but I know this too. It's just to make sure that in the future when there's other decks, but also I think this is also future proofing for other rank 4 decks or decks with rank 4 engines, if they were somehow combined with Ryziel. With Mitsurugi, it just keeps Mitsurugi from actually being able to make these types of decks, always having the bridge into King of the Feral Imps, which allows them to get started. I think the design is there to get rid of Feral Imps here in the TCG, just so that we don't have to deal with that anymore as a possibility down the line, because we do know at some point there will be more Mitsurugi support when the OCG gets access to Mitsurugi. So it's just a good time to nix it now, so it's not in the way of whatever they want to do. Now the next one is a Floodgate, or Floodgate-ish, is we have Harpy's Featherstorm. Like I said, another one, obvious. I think Featherstorm just needs to go because of how powerful this card is. Now, it's necessary that we talk about Featherstorm in an interesting light, because I think this card's always been in a weird position, because it's never always been in topping decks. Like, what I mean is, it's in decks that can win, but it's never been a card itself where it's been in a deck that can use this thing as well as it can. You usually have to tech in some Wing Beast, and because of Fualos, I have seen people normal summon Fualos and kind of set this card, and it's really hilarious. The point is, in order to address Featherstorm, because its turn-long Floodgate effect is just so powerful, I think it does need to go just off the backhand of how powerful this card is, because it's effectively a turn skip once it resolves properly, and a lot of times people just can't play out of this. So being a bit more generic in terms of people can make Wing Beasts and have this card available does allow them to kind of abuse it. And I do think that this card being banned really doesn't hurt anything, because unfortunately for Harpies, they're not topping, and if they could, I would be kind of glad if this card still existed at like 1 copy, but I think this card does need to go. But yeah, I think it's just because it's too much and it hits a lot of things and hurts. So our next one is going to be one that I think needs to be rebanned. Yes, a card needs to be rebanned. We're talking about Arch Nemesis Protoss. So Protoss needs to just go away, and the reason why I say Protoss needs to go away, because of Infernal Flame Banshee and because of the Nemesis archetype. I think the problem of this card is that people could argue that the problem is going to be Infernal Flame Banshee, but I personally believe it is Protoss, because Protoss is the one that makes the lock. So in order to deal with this, banning Protoss again is a fair move. I also think this is better because I do think Pyro is going to receive more like support design. So Banshee unfortunately does need to stay in the game, so I do think it's more likely that Protoss gets rebanned, because I do think that the random decks that do use Protoss showcase that eventually there will be a topping deck that could use Protoss again, and I think it's a better option that Protoss gets eliminated now so that we don't have to worry about it, and then in the future people can still run Flame Banshee. I guess Nemesis as an archetype could receive support, it just doesn't need to be as toxic as, you know, Ashados and Protoss, but then yeah, it keeps the rest of the deck functionally alive, because I don't think Nemesis is really that interesting of a deck, unfortunately. But I think that by getting rid of Protoss, you can at least leave the rest of the cards in that deck alone, and then you can leave Banshee alone for whatever they wanted to do. But yeah, Protoss going is, I think, fair, because there's some decks, especially like I've seen it like Gem Knights and other decks, they just poop out the Protoss and you can't do anything about it usually, because you've either hand trapped them already or no interaction, and you're just, well, that's the game. So getting rid of Protoss, I think, is a fair move. Now, our next ones are going to be some obvious picks. I have Paradise Smasher. I think the main reason Paradise Smasher needs to go is pretty simple. It's just that the card is too good. I think that this card causes too many really bad game states where when you actually have it resolve, it's just too much, because it's just so annoying as a floodgate. And this card going, I don't think is unhealthy for the game, because I don't like the fact that a lot of people can actually just hedge their bets on this card depending on what they're playing. So like if you're playing a Crystron version of K9, or if you're playing even like Vanquish Soul K9, if you could find a way to Paradise Smasher, it doesn't mean you're going to win, but more than likely you're going to turn the tide of any game into your favor heavily. And I think that because of its effect, where if you have 3 materials on the Paradise Smasher, it's really good. I think that Paradise Smasher needs to be hit, because it just eliminates that factor from the game. As I think Smasher is cool, but I do think that Smasher as a whole, even if people aren't seeing it used as much as you would expect, because I actually didn't like this card in Pure K9 just because you don't really need to make it that much, I still think this card needs to be nixed, because it would only make sense in terms of keeping the game more balanced, because having its existence in the game always leaves, literally because of how it works, and funny enough as a dice, you leave the game on a dice roll, and I think Konami does not want that as a thing. It's like if you had to flip a coin to decide who wins, no one really likes that, to be honest. So getting rid of Paradise Smasher at least eliminates that as a possibility, and allows the rank 5 engine to kind of be as it is for like K9 and stuff, so it leaves it kind of balanced. Now, talking about my last one, and this one's a speculative one, so I didn't want to finish on it, is that's going to be IP Masquerena. I actually want Masquerena banned. Now, the reason why I want this card banned is that I believe that with how we are addressing the game, I think it's okay for Masquerena to get banned, and I actually really like this card, but I think that this card being eliminated now is fine because of how much indirect problems it causes. Now, a lot of people know what I'm talking about, but the main issue is that Masquerena always turns into being a part of any deck as long as they're not locked out of links in terms of being placed on their end board. And if I had to be honest, like I said, I don't hate this card at all. I like it, but I think that it being banned now preemptively is fine, because this card eventually will be banned. I think this is a card that, although people say, oh, it's fair, I see this as a problematic card at some point where, you know, it just hasn't found a deck where it's completely toxic for what it does. But because it enables so many decks to link into their other bosses, especially when most of the boss monsters are not being made like type locked, they're being made like generically, this card always is in the center of making a boss monster even stronger, whether it's access code, whether it's something like even Akka code in Malice, or other cards as well. It always makes that monster that turns into a little bit stronger, but also it leads to, you know, effects activating during the opponent's turn, which, although interaction is fine, I do think that this card has always led towards the issue of it causing too many issues, where when it's used, it's always causing a problem. Now, I think it's being banned is okay too, because now people can't go IP into SP, and I think although that's the combo that they've designed it with, I think that's actually pretty fair, because everyone has access to SP at this point, and with the other reprint coming on the way, I think this is fine. But I do think nixing IP now is completely fine, because now this means SP has to be made during your turn to be a disruption, so I think that's really cool. But, you know, this is just a hopeful wish. Like I said, I don't really hate this card. I just think that this would be completely fine if it gets hit, because I foresee in the future this card being a problem down the line. Now we will go to the limited ones. Now, like I said, I'm not gonna have a semi-limited either, or an off, or a 3 of, or released, because I don't really want to cover that many cards because I don't want this to be too long. So I'm only gonna cover the cards I'm pretty certain should make moves. That's why my ban list is like, there would be more cards, I think, if I covered everything that could be banned, but I think those are the cards that are the safest bets for being banned outside of IP, because they're the ones that will either cause the most problems, have caused problems, or in reality need to go because they can fix the problems that we've saw in the last metagame. But going to the limited, we're going to start off with one that I think is going to take place, because I did not mention any Rise Eels for a reason, because I do think that the limitation to Rise Eels will take place. Now, honestly, whether it is going to be X or both, sword or both, or not, the point is this: I do think for Rise Eel, this deck definitely will not be completely annihilated, because I do think that the deck is good, but I do think Konami here in the TCG, for some reason, with how Justice Hunters have shaked up, banning these cards, or banning the deck outright for some of its extra deck wouldn't really make sense, because the deck has actually been shown to be power crept a lot by the Justice Hunters decks. But this does not mean that it cannot be left untouched if we have a ban list. I think the right call to make is that if they have not, because I do assume what's going to happen is we will probably see Rise Eel take a full hit, like completely vanish, after we receive reprints for the cards. And I do think that'll probably be in some side set or something. So my main thing that I'm thinking of is either the card that I would rather have banned out of Rise Eel would be X, because I think of the remaining parts of the archetype, if you ban X, it weakens the deck significantly to the point where at this point it would fall out of the metagame for the most part. It would still see some play, but it would mostly be gone because X is so strong. But I think that if we're going to have what feels like a Konami move, we'll see X and Sword go to 1. Now, the reason why both of these going to 1 doesn't matter, but I think it would happen is that this lessens the consistency of Rise Eel, which, believe it or not, I played this deck a little bit just to realize how it works with the Mitsurugi engine, and I do see that by reducing all of them for the most part to 2, if you reduce these again to 1, it really does change how the deck is going to function, because now, yes, you could run a bunch of non-engine, but the engine also now feels a bit like clunky, because the names matter for stuff like Cross, and also matter so that you search the right amount of names, but at the same time, you're not also cycling enough. And most people aren't going to run more than 1 star Rise Eel, so it kind of leaves it in this weird place where Rise Eel does need a hit, but I don't think it needs to be, nuked out of oblivion. Moving into the point of where these work, basically X is the most broken one, so giving people less copies of X I think is fine. Forcing them to search for X is completely okay. Sword, very similar, to the point where you need an enabler to search for, say for instance, the X. So by limiting down Sword, you now limit down the ability to get access to X. So you start to see the point of this. Like I said, I think they're going to try to resell. They're going to package these into some set again, because it would make sense. But if I'm wrong and if something happens to the deck more significantly, I'm kind of glad. But yeah, this is just how I foresee it happening. This feels like a complete Konami move, where they would just limit these again, or limit these down to reduce its viability. Going into Malice, I think the interesting thing for Malice is that I do have a soft spot for this deck because my friend plays it a lot, or I'd played it a lot. But I do think that this deck will receive some hit, because I think Konami can't leave it unchecked on the ban list. But I do think because of the power creep and the way that this deck has been hit really hard by like floodgate cards, I think the hard part of me trying to balance this deck was there isn't really a good way to do it without banning something, but I think Konami will definitely do this move of limiting cards. So my option would be for this deck specifically over Rise Eel. It would probably receive a double hit, because I do think that Malice's ability to 1-card combo is just a little bit easier than the Rise Eel's ability. So the way that this would be done is I'm going after Dormouse and Underground. And the reason why is both of these are harder play starters. So Underground lets you banish whatever you want for the most part, and you'd probably want to banish a monster. So we want to reduce that number, so it forces you to play cards like Gold Sark and other things like that. But also hitting Dormouse down to 1 is important, because I believe that of the monsters, I think Chessy Cat's fine where it's at. I think that between White Rabbit and Dormouse, White Rabbit is the one I would leave at 2, because it does banish a trap, which is good, but I do think it's because Dormouse banishes any monster. This is where the more power potential is here. So it leaves, the actual Malice deck a little bit more exposed, because Dormouse is now at 1, it would be a sitting target for a lot of hand traps. So I do think this reduces the power of the deck a lot, but it also keeps the ability for the other monsters to still survive. Stuff like, you know, your March Hare and, like I said, Chessy Cat as well, and then White Rabbit. Sorry. So by hitting Dormouse, I think it's probably the best way to weaken the deck without actually killing it. So I do leave it at that. Now, talking about some touch-ups that will have to happen, one is going to be Mitsurugi. I think Mitsurugi does get hit on our ban list. I don't think it's going to be major, though. So the main reason I have Mitsurugi Prayers being the card that goes to 1 is the fact that Prayers is, I think, the card that enables a lot of the problematic like situations. And what I mean by this is, in Mitsurugi, when I played against it, one of the problems of the deck is not like Habakiri, because once Habakiri resolves once, you know, you don't have to worry about that again. But it's still not an issue because it has to be activated during the opponent's turn. Now, Prayers, yes, you have to activate it on your turn when you get it the first time. But once Prayers ends up in rotation based on the way that the deck works, I think it's the problem as it continues to be more of a card where if your opponent opens this, their draw phase can consist of using Prayers immediately, or their standby phase, vice versa, to use Prayers, or vice versa. They can use Prayers almost as a disruption to tribute like one of their reptiles off the field. I think that this card, based off of what it does and how much work it puts in, this is the card that I think if it gets hit to 1, I think this is fair in the TCG specifically, because there is going to be like less of an issue with this for the OCG right now, because the OCG obviously doesn't have Mitsurugi yet. So they're going to get support for Mitsurugi. So I think that if we had to be honest about Mitsurugi, it either doesn't get touched at all or it gets hit this way. I do think that Habakiri is really strong, but I do think that they leave Habakiri alone for this ban list because I do think it's relatively new. And I think they'll leave Habakiri alone probably for another ban list unless, you know, for some reason Mitsurugi gets out of hand. But to weaken the deck, I think Prayers is the right choice because it just makes the deck slightly weaker for sure, but keeps the core of it actually together. You don't hit Ritual, you don't hit stuff like Murakumo, you don't hit Aramasa, stuff like that. You don't hit these cards that are very important to the strategy, and you just leave that this card is still very important, but leaving it at 1 means it stays in rotation. It can be searched out off of Saji, but also doesn't make it, or yeah, it doesn't make, well, no, Saji searches for monsters. Is it? Yeah, Armas, or whichever one searches for the spells and traps. It leaves this in rotation, but it doesn't make it so toxic to the point where opening triple Prayers is, you know, or open if your opponent opens like double Prayers, that they're in a good position as long as they have a monster. So I think that's kind of what will happen. Our next one is a touch for the Tins, Engraver. I think Engraver obviously will be hit to some degree. Now, I know what people are thinking. The Tins have showcased all the Fiendsmith stuff. Here's my reason for Engraver being hit. Engraver being hit is the best way for them to say they've hit Fiendsmith without actually hitting Fiendsmith. And the point is, this is a Konami move for sure, where they'll say Fiendsmith Engraver goes to 1, and now the deck has its reprints. It's still somewhat playable. It's still viable. It's cheaper, and because of the rarity collection, rarity collection, the actual Fiendsmith Engraver was cheap already. So this gives the actual players a chance to get their Fiendsmith engine available, but in a nerfed version, so that the deck isn't, or the actual engine isn't super overbearing. I know this is like probably a interesting maybe choice. I think people may or may not care, but I do think that when it comes down to it, Fiendsmith Engraver going to 1 actually stands a very good chance, as Konami is used to just hitting things. And I do think this is a great way for Konami to just say, hey, we've addressed Fiendsmith in our own way, but, you know, we haven't fully killed the deck, so you guys can play with it for a while. But yeah, this is what happened. Engraver is now at 1. So, you know, very much a Konami move. Finally, my last touch-up I have is actually a very interesting one. So I have Vanquish Soul start going to 1. Now, I do think this is interesting in the sense of, because of how the metagame's shaken out, Yummy has clearly shown that it is the better deck of Vanquish Soul. However, I do think that Vanquish Soul will get possibly a touch on the ban list, only to reduce its viability in the metagame. Now, I don't think this is like the best hit at all. I think this is like an okay hit, because start is more so being hit because of the protection it gives the deck versus the actual ability for it to search. Because yes, it searches, but it needs a condition. I think that the reason that this would be touched is that they do want to find a way to weaken Vanquish Soul, because I know in reality there might be a change because of how Duelist Advance is done, because Vanquish Soul is like the only thing selling the set roughly at the moment, outside of a few cards. So it is kind of an up to them of like what they want to do. But I do think that by actually addressing Vanquish Soul start making it a one of is not to be like, oh, they hate Vanquish Soul. It's more of to say, hey, we know Vanquish Soul is like really strong and it's a very good deck, but we also want to make sure that we lessen its power so that other decks can kind of be in the metagame. I think if this happened, the other K9 variants of different decks do maybe take a little bit more of a step forward, although I think Vanquish Soul still has a slightly higher ceiling when it's pulled off. I do think stuff like Crystron K9 pull themselves up slightly higher, and then other versions of other decks kind of pull their way back in just slightly because we're trying to reduce the viability of Vanquish Soul without killing the deck. And I think by doing this, this loses their protection, so now they're a little bit more vulnerable to other stuff, and also means that the player must be build a little bit more focused on making sure they protect Vanquish Soul start, because if it goes away, there isn't another copy to just simply be dropped back down onto the field. So I think this going to 1 is a possibility. I mean, it could be another card too in the deck. Like I said, the only reason I see them hitting Vanquish Soul is that this ban list waited a long time for some reason, and I could see that they made some like changes to modern decks right now just to hit them. I couldn't think about the Justice Hunters decks being hit right away just off the chance that if they did, it seems really weird to hit them. So I thought, well, Duelist Advance was the latest set, and I couldn't really see any deck out of there really being hit that was that strong outside of Vanquish Soul. And that's the only one I could think offhand that could really receive any realistic hit that's actually making its meta presence. But guys, I'm going to finish it up here today. This has been my ban list video addressing the ban list that I think will be happening soon. If it's not today or tomorrow or whenever, hopefully we have already had it. If not, you know, good luck. Enjoy the video. I hope there's some opinions here you guys might agree with. If not, let me know down below. These are just the cards that I'm pretty sure would need to be either addressed or talked about. I'm not saying this is a perfect ban list by any means. I actually have a lot more cards to talk about if I want to do a perfect ban list, but this is what I've got for you guys, and I hope you enjoy it. But guys, as always, this has been Brad from the Ed Army signing off, and for all of you out there, to sign on.